Hi all, it's Emily Rand here with another episode of, I guess this is Combo Tea of Legends LPL Corner. We've had making the rounds across LPL Corner with Kelsey, and now I'm rejoined by Ashley Kang for another episode of talking about LPL alongside LCK. So first of all, Ashley, thank you so much for coming back.
Yeah, I don't know. Always glad to be back at one of those shows. Thanks for having me, Emily.
No worries. So we were gonna start. I was gonna launch like right into questions and comparing regions, but actually, there's some pretty big news coming out of LCK. And the first part of it is actually I'm really upset about as a, kind of a minor region champion, but unfortunately, the two Vietnamese teams will not be able to go due to pandemic concerns. Basically, the Vietnamese government is not allowing people from China to fly back into the country. And this is a common thing with a lot of countries. I know we talked to Jacob and I had an interview with Jeannie Kim, who's one of the lawyers that works with LCS teams regarding visas and stuff, and she said this is also an issue with the U.S. with European countries. There are just certain countries that other countries will not allow their people to like return from due to COVID. And if the Vietnamese teams were to go to China, they would not be allowed back into Vietnam, which means that there was an uneven because there's one Vietnamese team in main stage, one Vietnamese team in play-in. There was an uneven amount in main stage, so they've actually bumped the third LCK team up. So now all three LCK teams are in the main stage alongside the top three European seeds, the top three Chinese seeds, and the top two NA seeds. How do you, like, just first of all, how do you think this is going to affect LCK teams, if at all?
Like, I would proceed it with, I agree with you that I feel super bad about the VCS teams not being there at Worlds. They were always like an extremely joy to watch in the World stage, I remember the Gigabyte the Game Esports and the Buffaloes before that, upsetting even the big teams, and they have a very, very aggressive, like super interesting play style to watch, which we are going to miss out. And Vietnam also has a huge audience for League of Legends. Like their League of Legends playing population is second biggest in the world, only after China, bigger than NA, bigger than Korea, bigger than Europe. So I'm super gutted about it, but like indirectly I guess directly it did impact the LCK, and it's a huge news for especially the third seed team for the LCK, because LCK had a very, very tight schedule. So after the regional qualifiers, which is going to be held at the morning in NA time, the the summer finals, they were going to play three best of fives, I believe, back to back to back, just to choose who is going to be the third team from the LCK going to Worlds. And if they started for play-ins, this is my suspicion, I have no confirmation on this, they'll probably had to fly out to China only a few days after playing those best of fives, just to like meet the quarantine. I have no like confirmation on how the quarantine is going to work, etc. But this is just an assumption that the fans have also voiced on the community. And if they are starting on the group stage, not only does it increase their chances of going higher in the Worlds, but that means that they can perhaps fly out later to China, which is big, because even when the Korean teams are sitting in Korea, they can still scrim against like any team there are in China. I'm assuming that is the case because Korean teams have been known to scrim against Chinese teams all the time. So this will benefit the third team hugely, which will be one of Africa, KT, T1, and one of Gen.g or Damwon, because DRX has already made it to World Championship.
I can't believe I wish KT didn't have a chance. It's the only, as you know, it's the only team I'm actually like emotionally invested in, like an actual fan of. Um, and I've been a KT fan for years, and I totally forgot that they were still in the region qualifier. So I'm like, oh no, now I'm emotionally invested to watching them probably lose in the first round. Anyway, that leads me to my next question, because I do not think KT are going to qualify. Obviously, as you said, Dragon X have already qualified. Um, I think the two other teams are going to be Gen.g and Damwon. Because we're going to be answering Twitter questions for most of the episode. And I want to look at this from if these three teams qualify, because a lot of them are about playstyle matchups, potential playstyle matchups and stuff like that. So what teams do you think from the LCK are going to qualify alongside DragonX?
I think like upsets have happened in LCK before. Even in the playoffs, we saw that. T1, like Africa actually beat T1 when all the casters and analysts were predicting them like to win in a 2-0 even. But however, especially given that gen.g has 3-0'd Africa in the playoffs, and Damon looked extremely dominant throughout the entire split, the summer split. Like, I haven't seen a single time when Damon looked like a worse team compared to any of their opponents. So if it's going to be Damon Gaming or gen.g, I have to say that it will be both of those teams going to Worlds.
Okay. Yeah, so you were in agreement with that. So I will kick things off with a question from Katie Panthera, so a Kongdu Overwatch fan. And they ask, I guess this is more of an overarching question, but what are your thoughts on the LCK in terms of regional strength when compared to the LPL and the rest of the world this year? Is LCK more or less competitively viable coming into Worlds 2020 compared to last year? So I have a lot of, I guess, opinions on just the general strength of League of Legends right now. So I'll let you field this first, and then I will share my horrible opinions.
Like, the strength of LCK in particular would be the amount of raw talent that comes out of South Korea simply because of the PC-bound culture and the amount of League of Legends that, the teenagers play from their country. LCK continues to be the only country without having an import, despite the fact that in terms of like pure amount of people who play League of Legends, China is like at least several times more. So we finally see it blossoming, and all the Korean teams have a really, really good training system, which is also the case for LPL. And we see that with Carrier, who have been promoted into the DRX main roster after being a trainee in their team for around 2 years. And, Diamond Gaming players, they have been known as the solo queue talent who are finally getting their stage experience and blossoming. And even if I am only talking about DRX and Diamond Gaming in gen.g, there is also a big chance for, let's say, T1 makes it, and Kana and even LM and Kuri, who saw a bit of a playtime, are also training prospects. So I think that's a big strength of LCK, having that raw talent. Whether LCK has a better chance this year compared to last year, I will say so. I think a lot of perhaps hubris, am I pronouncing it right? Hubris?
Yeah.
Hubris that LCK had definitely got dented at the result of last year's Worlds and got completely broken at the 2020 MSC, where LCK got completely crushed by LPL. And two things have happened. First, the LCK teams decided to radically change their play style and what they believe is the ideal play style. Because even in 2019, I remember interviewing many different players from different LCK teams, and they told me, hey, just play styles are just different depending on the regions. And I think the LCK's approach of playing slow, macro-based, less chaotic can have its strength as long as we can master it. I haven't heard any of that narrative in this year's interviews, especially coming into 2020 summer. Everyone's like, yeah, we saw what the LPL could do in the MSC. We want to be more aggressive. We want to fight more. We want to skirmish more, even though we might not be used to it for now. So we can gain that muscle memory when it comes to, proactive, aggressive fighting style. And I think we've seen that even in the stats. LCK started having a faster game time. There are more kills and more deaths happening. I'm not saying that 100% equivalents to better League of Legends, but I just like the fact that LCK is exploring a different play style compared to what they have cemented since 2014 Samsung-wide success. And Also, like from talking to individual players, I get the feeling that they are now referencing other regions more, not just LPL, but also LEC, etc. When it comes to picks and strategies, like Diamond Gaming players especially have been quite open about it. Daryl says, yeah, we watch like the LEC matches and like if Mad Lions play this, if G2 plays that, we try to bring it on. And if the scrims are going right with those picks, we even tried it on stage because LCK has slightly slower, like, patch, what do you call it? Like they apply the patches a few days slower compared to other regions. So LCK has been watching other regions first, and having that variety of sources that they can reference will benefit them when it comes to playing at Worlds.
So yeah, so just generally, I'll start off with the fact that I think the quality of League of Legends, and this applies to like all regions. This is what I was joking about is my terrible opinion. Although I guess it's not such a terrible opinion because like I don't think the strength gap has necessarily fluctuated between like region to region to region all that much, but I do think that just generally the quality of League of Legends is down only because, we've fluctuated a lot between going on LAN and going online.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to murder this dog. We fluctuate a lot between going on LAN and going online, and I think that's affected the quality of the play across the board. And this is not like an LPL LCK thing. I think it's overall, like I've seen the LPL get significantly better when they had a full like season of stage games as opposed to spring when they had to go offline and then come back online and then like finally it wasn't until the actual final itself that they returned to being able to play in a LAN environment, obviously still without audiences. So I think if there's one thing that might help Chinese teams in that regard in the very beginning, it would actually be that, which isn't even a play style thing. That's just they've been able to play on LAN for the longest like stretch of time. The LCK would have been there as well, unfortunately, until like very recently. So I think that's something that's going to affect the quality of play just generally, and I think other regions will catch up to that once, especially. I mean, people are kind of joking about the 14-day quarantine period, but like, what are teams going to do during that? They're just going to sit there and scrim each other, right? Like, this isn't going to be, they're not going to be like super sad. I mean, maybe they're going to be sad if they can't like go outside, but whenever I talk to teams who are in like when I would talk to Western teams, I visited South Korea when a ton of them were boot camping there, and they would always be like, "Oh yeah, like I'd take them to like Namdaemun, and they'd be like, "Oh man, this is the first time I've been outside." Like, so I expect the LPL teams just based off of that to have like a slight advantage early, and then it'll even out. I think if the LPL has like one overarching strength above all other regions that still it is, like even compared to, I think, a faster LCK team like Damwon, it would be that they team fight constantly, like so much. And you see it in the way that they set up like skirmishes in their advantage. You see in the way that they, and I was going to bring this up with a later question, but the way that they prioritize Drake is sometimes a lot different. A lot of the LPL teams are first teams in the world that I saw to kind of eschew going for early Drakes completely unless they were like a lot freer. Like they wouldn't necessarily set up for specifically for an early Drake, but they would instead accrue laning advantages or advantages from small skirmishes and then fight over third Drake with those advantages. So I think that's a really interesting playstyle difference. I think because especially, and I'm particularly thinking of JDG and TES, who I think are the two strongest teams that the LPL is sending this year. They are both very strong T-fighting teams. I think TES is the best 5v5 team in the world. And that is going to be, if there's one like definitive strength that the LPL has, it's not even in the early skirmishes, although they will fight you. Generally, and they will fight you constantly outside of Suning, and I will say Suning and LGD to some extent, mainly Suning, tend to play a little bit slower. I think Suning's the most like standard team the LPL is sending. But yeah, I mean, I think the LCK is more competitively viable by a slight margin because of what I've seen from Damwon and to some extent what I've seen from DRX, although DRX are a lot more inconsistent. So I sometimes never know what they're gonna do, especially with some of their drafts. But and that's not. I mean, LPL teams pick ridiculous comps all the time and win with them. So that's not even a slight. It's just if they pick something really wonky, can they execute it kind of thing. All right, that was a super long time period. Just that one question. Which LCK team matches up best against the four LPL teams stylistically or because of specific players? This question is from Josh or Shatterfront, the #1 Easy Eye fan on Twitter. I think we both agree on this. I definitely think it's Damwon. What do you think?
I have to go with Damwon 100% here. It's just like Damwon tends to pick what they believe is strong. Like, they don't do the whole complex thing where, yeah, like, hey, the meta, blah, 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 blah. It almost feels like they pick on their whim, but like, in a whim as in like, Damwon has a very, very, very like good idea of what works in the meta and what the players like to play. Like, for example, like in Damwon, Showmaker tends to favor Kassadin slightly more than the other mid lane junglers, while Beryl is like, known for his Pantheon support. I almost said Pantheon jungle because he does play it like a jungle champion or like, other tank champions support. But like, Damwon has like a specific idea of what works best for them and they're good at drafting them and executing, which is what I see with a lot of LPL teams. Like, when we talk about LPL teams, a lot of people consider, okay, LPL teams, like, they all fight, but like, LPL teams are actually varied in playstyle and what kind of champions they want to play because each team has a very specific idea of what is strong in the meta and they actually cater their playstyle around it. So in that way, I would say that, Damwon Game is quite like LPL and also they almost remind me, except for the bot lane, because I think Damwon Gaming bot lane is very, very unique and special in terms of like, they absorb a lot of pressure in order to enable the top side of the map. But, when I look at the top side of the map, I think of a lot of the LPL like teams, like, Showmaker being a very, very mechanically insane player who also likes to roam a lot. Nuguri, of course, he's been compared to Deshai a lot, and Kenyon, another extremely good jungler who and the Damwon as a team invest a lot in Kenyon to carry and had the level difference compared to the other junglers. So I do see a lot of specific characteristic in Damwon Gaming that reminds me of a lot of the LPL teams. And, they like to fight well and they win a lot of those fights.
Yeah, I specifically, based on, I mean, you kind of summed up Damwon's playstyle there, but I really specifically want to see them against JDG because of this. I think there would be, depending on what JDG lock in for Yakao, I think that would be a really interesting matchup for me because while I think that Damwon would have the advantage in the straight like mid lane 1v1. I think the way they play around their jungler, their mid jungle is slightly different in how JDG plays around Knavi and especially the top side of the map with Zoom. And Zoom is a very different player than Noguri, but I think that's why like he doesn't get a lot of credit from the community for being as good as he is because people think of him as a tank only player when he can play, in my opinion, like the vast majority of the carries. The team doesn't always need him to, but he's already proven in playoffs that he's still really good on those champions as well and can also control team fights with them. So I think that this would be a really interesting matchup, especially for, and I'd want to see which team would get like what side because I'd want to see support counter pick for Lumao and Beryl because that is an insanely fun matchup. Anyway, that's why I want to see Damwon versus JDG.
Yeah.
Obviously, the two of us can't necessarily speak to this, but it is an interesting question. I think both, to preface this, I think both regions have pretty consistently sent rookie or like younger talent that hasn't been to world championships in the past that has still worked out really, really well. So I don't think it's necessarily going to affect either region more or less than the other. But the next question is, what will be the main difference in mentality between LPL and LCK rookies from Chui K? And the only thing I can say that I've noticed in a difference is that LPL rookies are still a little bit more aggressive and reliant on like themselves and their mechanics. Like they'll go for a lot of those 1v1s or 2v2s, depending on if they're like communicating with jungle or support rooms. That's like the only slight stylistic difference, but I think LCK rookies do that as well. If anything, I think it's something that teams in the past had tended to like train out of them. Like they'd be like, no, you can't do that. You need to reset and wait for vision and wait for your jungler or whatever. Whereas, a team like Damwon has kind of eschewed that a bit more for a little bit more like raw laning power, raw 1v1s and raw 2v2s. That's like the only slight difference I can see in rookies, like not even raw rookies, but like also rookies to the World Championship stage, right? Because we have we've had a lot of turnover in the LPL this year regarding organizations going to Worlds, and also we have a lot of first timers to the World Championship. But I don't think it'll affect them a ton mentally. That's the main, like, I guess, mentality towards the game difference that I've seen. But even then, it's not that much of a difference.
Like, I agree with you on the mentality thing, on what kind of player gets celebrated in the LCK compared to LPL. And I think LPL does slightly celebrate, like, insanely high mechanical outplay players. I look at the fact that Shy, who is a great player, but the fact that he was voted as the MVP of the split, like, how many times in a row? Like 5 times for top lane, and then like, and many, I do think that the Shy is an amazing player, but like, I also know that the Shy's particular play style, even though it can sometimes be very, very risky, has been looked up by the audience as well as many Chinese top laners. So I think that kind of mentality also affects the rookie. I agree with you that LPL rookies, even though the stage fright might hit them, tend to still keep their aggression when they go on the stage, but LCK rookies, like, and every rookie is different because every personality is different. LCK rookies tend to be a bit more passive compared to their perhaps like domestic or scrim matches in a bigger stage, which is a big issue that Diamond Gaming seems to have suffered in 2019 Worlds. Because in 2019 Worlds, Diamond Gaming were mostly rookies to a big stage. But I look at the other rookies, like Keria, like I haven't necessarily seen him play too passively on a stage. Even like, if anything, he's quite an aggressive like support player. And who's another rookie that could go to Worlds? Like Kana, like I think he has developed so much as a player throughout this entire year that I don't even necessarily see him as a rookie anymore. And I think he'll still be a consistent rock to T1 if the T1 does make it to Worlds. Yeah, like Kosick, perhaps he might play a bit more passively or play more volatilely when it comes to the big stage. Like, Kosick is the only true rookie like that hasn't completely shed off that, like, the rookie difference between like scrims and stage, like, out of the system.
Yeah. And I think like we kind of one of the things that I was actually really impressed about, to shout out Yi Yanja from Top Esports, just to kind of cap this, is that I was not super confident in him going to MSC because he'd had a lot less practice with Jackie Love. He just didn't always look comfortable with the team. He made a lot of mistakes going into like through their playoff matches. And he really showed up at MSC. And while I still don't think he's like one of the best supports in the LPL, I think you can definitely see an increase in his performance. And since he's already been to like still a virtual stage, but still like a pretty important matchups, like Chinese teams and South Korean teams took MSC seriously. Despite the fact that it was like on an inflated ping and stuff. And I think he really showed up on a main stage. So I thought that was like a good, like a harbinger of the fact that LPL rookies seem to really kind of take things in stride and not have like, and again, like you said, every player is different. So I can't speak to every player, but like I'm using Yanja as an example of someone who, I don't think a ton was expected of him from the community, and he performed actually like really, really well at MSC to the point where people all around the world were pointing out like, wow, this guy's thresh is like amazing. Is the LPL style play the best way to play the game? In post-game interviews around the world with your players saying they actively want to be more aggressive on the map like LPL versus the more controlled scaling comps of NA and LCK. This is from Vexeritis. I'm going to pronounce all of these names wrong. So I'll lead off with, I think, something that always happens, and I'm going to use FPX as an example. I think something that always happens whenever there's one team at the top. So we saw it with all of the South Korean teams of the past. We saw it with G2 actually, I would say starting at the 2018 World Championship, but especially throughout most of last year, where the team that people were talking about wasn't necessarily IG, which is kind of unfortunate because as much as I dunk on IG, I do think in 2018 their like red side counter pick strategy, especially for their solo laners, is really like it was a solid strategy, right? Like yes, they're beating you with their mechanics, but like it's not just a complete raw like we press buttons better kind of thing. Like there was an actual strategy to this. There was an actual setup for this. G2 was the team that everyone talked about especially after they won outside, right? Like everyone was like, we need to play more like G2. Previously, it was we need to play more like
RNG.
like the I would say yeah, like RNG, which again was I think they don't get enough credit for their 1-3-1, but like it was more like 5v5 team fighting. We're never gonna win without having this like really really strong team fight, and that actually started in 2017 Worlds. So like there's a trickle in, and like everything kind of bleeds together depending on who people think the top team in the world is at that moment. This massively happened with FPX, which is honestly kind of hilarious to me, if only because Joinby played this way for forever. And it was so funny to watch people go from being like, Joinby is terrible. Why is he giving up 5 waves in mid? And Tian has to come reset the wave, and this is awful, etc. To like everyone being like, I want to play more like Joinby. I want to play more like Joinby. FPX is the style to play. So I think it is less about whether the quote-unquote LPL style, which I actually think all 4 teams that we're sending to Worlds this year have different play styles across the board. But I think in terms of like LPL style, if there's one thing I could categorize as LPL style, it's kind of what I talked about before, where players are just a lot more confident in their own mechanics, and they're a lot more confident in taking 1v1s. They're a lot more confident in taking 2v2s. They prefer setups around team fighting than like what you would consider more strong and standard setups around objectives typically. Even I would say the most like standard team in Suning will still take a lot of fights that you might not necessarily see from teams in other regions. So I think I do think part of this is less about the LPL style play and more about whoever everyone in the world at one point or another thinks is the best team. Because now there's kind of, with FPX not qualifying, I feel like that idea of how we should play the game has suddenly moved away from we need to be playing towards Joinby's mid style where we have this kind of mid laner who roams, like pushes in the wave regardless of how many, waves you miss or whether it's going to crash properly or anything like that, and then roams to side lanes along with the jungler and along with the support and sets up all these early skirmishes. I don't necessarily think we see that in the same way from any of the LPL teams that are coming this year. Like I said, TES, I think they're the best 5v5 team in the world. I think JDG are really good at drafting around strengths and weaknesses. They also have an incredibly strong 5v5. And Luma helps with his picks set a lot of skirmishes up for them. Suning is more standard, and LGD is really interesting because the way that they play around mid jungle as well is a lot different than the other LPL teams. So again, this is a lengthy answer, but like, I don't think it's about like better or worse. And I think to your point in a question you answered earlier, I think it has a lot, like when teams are looking at not the community, but like teams themselves, when they're looking at other teams around the world, I want them to take into consideration what other teams are doing, but still stick to what they know best, right? Like, I think JDG are actually an incredible example of this because they have very obvious weaknesses as a team, but they play around them so well. And I think the best teams in the world will be able to do this because every team has weaknesses. If you understand yourself as a team and who your players are and draft accordingly, regardless of what people have to say about that draft in a vacuum, if that's the LPL style of play, then yes, I believe it's the best way to play the game. But do I think like mindless aggression and constantly setting up skirmishes, etc., is always the best way to play the game? No, it depends on your players.
Okay. In my case, I'll answer this question in two parts, and also something that came to my mind when you mentioned G2. And like, G2 dominating, and like now Damon is dominating in the LCK at the moment, even though we haven't seen the result of the finals yet. I feel like the top team in a region really impacts the playstyle of the respective region, especially except for maybe the LPL. Like, G2 came in, like even before that, LEC was kind of known for like, interesting picks, but G2 came in and showed everyone that, hey, we are playing with the map really intelligently. We're giving up some objectives, but we're going to take more benefit out of the other side of the map. We know how to move around the map. We're going to drop some crazy stuff and make it work. And not only were they winning on matches, they were probably winning in scrims too. I'm just guessing, and that impacts other teams to say that, hey, like, G2 is seeing success. Maybe let's try some different picks. Let's try to come up with some unique stuff from the solo queue. And I think that slowly shapes how a region plays. And same with LCK. I just talked about, the MSC fall and how that has, influenced the LCK teams to, hey, like, let's take the reference from the LPL. But I don't think that's the only reason that the LCK team started playing faster. I see the success of Damwon, and hey, when we get a small amount of lead, we actually going to cross in you and snowball, maybe in a bit of a rough, like, they're not like fine tuned like a surgery knife. They're just like a massive snowball that just like crushes through everything. Like that's like a Damwon playstyle. And it was seeing success, like, hey, let's play aggressive champion in the top lane. Let's just like, try to take all this spice. And it was working, and I'm guessing in the scrims too. And other teams take note of it and try to pick up the playstyle from the winning team. Like even at the LCS, I've been told that when Team Liquid was super dominating the region, like, everyone was trying to learn from Team Liquid and trying to perhaps like reference their playstyle. So I think there is a bit of that, but whether LPL playstyle is successful, as Emily mentioned, like, LPL has a tendency of every team like finding the unique playstyle, but the hyper-aggressive style, like, everyone team fighting all the time, I don't necessarily think that that is the only way or the best way to play League of Legends. And I don't even see that all the LPL teams will necessarily play that style. Like, I see the 4 teams that made it to Worlds, and I know that at least 3 of them, I'm not going to mention who the other one is, but like, I know that they're super capable of playing this slow style where they only get 1 or 2 kills pre-15 minute. But if you skirmish and team fight all the time in a league, it gives you that, the muscle memory, that ability to make the split-second decisions. It, like, if you look at, like, there's like 5 players on this side and 5 players on this side on the Dragon Pit, and that split-second decision, hey, I look at all this and my brain processes it, we know we can take this team fight and we will win this. Like, if you do that more than, like, if you do that more often than other regions, then you become better at it. And no matter which style of League of Legends you're playing, in the end, you're going to have team fights, and you have to win the team fights in order to win the game. So in that way, I think LPL has created a good environment for teams to become stronger simply because of amount of frequencies of skirmishes and team fights you have in the LPL.
That's how IG wins fights 8K down. Is Logan a top 5 ADC at Worlds? So we're assuming that Ruler, Ghost, and Deft is already qualified. Is going to be up against, let's see, Jackie Love, Kramer. Guanfeng is interesting, and then obviously like Perks and Reckless. So this question is from Mark Kent. Logan, so I'll just talk about, because I'm not sure. I think it depends on what you value. I think what I will reiterate about JDG specifically, this also applies to TES in a slightly different way, but I think the current meta is, provided it doesn't change all that much, the current bot lane meta is really great for Logan and for the way that JDG want to play, because they don't necessarily want to take the same 2v2s that you would see, for example, like a victory, like they're not at Worlds, but like Victory 5, right? They would always take these early 2v2s. They would always jump on their lane opponents. JDG, I think of more like you want to unlock Lu Mao because he has a lot of these picks that are going to make it so that JDG has uneven skirmishes that they can win around the map, while they're waiting for Kanavi to scale up, because he is like typically a primary damage carry for them as well. And the current bot lane meta is really great for Loken because he has a lot of self-sustaining picks. And I don't mean sustain as in, like, I just realized I used the word sustain. I don't mean it sustain in the League of Legends sense where he can, like, heal himself. I just mean that you can put him in a bot lane, even in a 1v2, and he can just farm under turret. Something like an Ezreal or an Asher, like, he'll be fine, right? So now that it's not this, like, more, like, super aggressive, like, or a little bit more laning aggressive, like a Kai'Sa or an Azaya or even Aphelios, depending on the strength of Aphelios at the time or across this entire year. I don't think Aphelios was back in lane, but like you look at what LPL is playing right now, Ezreal, Jhin, Caitlyn's kind of pretty much been permabanned, but like these are things that I feel like Logan can kind of just sit back on. They can unlock Lu Mao. It's a really great meta for him. He is also individually, I will say, meta notwithstanding, had in my opinion, the best split of his career this past split. When JDG were struggling in the very beginning of the season, like the team looked pretty lost or tired. Lu Mao wasn't performing as well as he is now. Logan was like the shining star of this team. Like he was their kind of like saving grace for the first few matches that they had. So I think it's less about Loken being like a top 5 individually and more about, again, the strength that JDG gives him through their play style and also the current meta. I think they're really smart about how they play with Loken. Individually, though, like if I'm just looking at like raw mechanical, like individual talent, if Teddy makes it, I would put Teddy over him. I would put Ruler over him. I would put Deft and Jackie Love over him. I would probably put Perks above him as well, even though Perks has had kind of a that's weird because he's had a rough year, or a rough summer especially. But yeah, I mean, I think he should be in the conversation, and I think it depends how much you're valuing how a team plays around your player. And I'm not trying to take anything away from Loken because he has had, like, quite honestly, the best split of his career. Like when he started with Key and everyone was like, this is going to be the next big bot lane, right? Like the season that Loken has had this summer is exactly what we wanted to see back then from like the beginnings of Loken on ESC ever. So I think he's definitely in the conversation. It also depends on who qualifies from Korea. But I might, depending on that, put him just outside of top 5 or like squeaking into top 5. I'd have to think about it a little bit more.
So I kind of agree with Emily on a way that like League of Legends is a team game, and after several patches when we had, previously we had some extreme patches where like Art and Sensor, oh my gosh, like everyone had to play through bot lane. Like there was that top lane meta where, where you perma-take teleport and flash at the top lane and then like, try to play Renekton and Shyvana. But I think League of Legends is in a state. People do complain about the whole Drake thing, but at the same time, I think it's in a way that you can pick and choose which lane you want to focus on. Like, you can decide to pick a jungle and then like a ganking jungle and just perma-dive bot, or you can have a good roaming top that can try to roam to the mid. You can have a farming jungler. So you can decide to pick a specific comp where you, like you said, give up 2 Drakes in the early and try to get enough gold that you can't really lose a team fight after that, or you try to go with the comp that tries to get those early 2 Drakes and kind of snowball from those. You can take the game in so many different ways, and it's about how a specific player fits into that specific play style. I'll give an example of Ghost. You know, is Ghost like a superstar, like, you know, player like Ruler, who I believe, Ruler or Jackie Love? Probably not, but Ghost is so good at, like you say, sustain and like surviving those, like, you know, 1v2 situations while Beryl roams around everywhere on picks like Sejuani support. So Ghost is like and Ghost is mechanically gifted. Like, you know, I've seen him do like crazy outplays, but at the same time, what this current Diamond Gaming needs is a reliable, not volatile, reliable AD carry who has a very high floor when it comes to his performance that can survive a bot lane, any kind of bot lane situation. And Ghost is a perfect example of that. So Ghost is what this team needs, and Loken is what JDG reads right now. So I would say he's a perfect example. And I don't necessarily think that having those like crazy outplays necessarily makes a best player. Like the criteria is so difficult. So I would actually put Loken higher than how a lot of people would rate. You know, I would definitely say he's underrated.
I'll have to take this into consideration when I fight for the honor of LPL players in our ESPN top 20 players thing that's coming later. I know this was pre-recorded. We both have to duck out to do other interviews and meetings today. But thank you so much for taking the time to join me. If you want to tell people where they can find you and your work.
So I have a Twitter at Ashley Kang. So I spam photos of LCK players and whine about the fate of LCK in 2020 Worlds, but I also post content there, usually about the LCK, but also I do other coverages in LEC and even LCS. So if you're interested in League of Legends in general, please check out my Twitter. And also Horizon Esports is my main outlet. I primarily focus on video interviews, and they all go up on YouTube. So if you're interested in video interviews, please check out Horizon Esports on YouTube.
What I learned from this exchange is that we really need to see that JDG Damwon matchup. Like, the more we've talked about both of these teams, I'm like, I need to see it. I need to see it. Thank you so much again.
I'm like, what is DRX gonna do at Worlds?
Who knows? DRX look like the best team, or they can just look.
Are they gonna bomb out of groups, or are they gonna go all the way to finals? Like, they're so difficult to make predictions with. I don't know.
We'll see some interesting drafts, I'm sure. From all LPL teams as well, because I know like people from other regions watch their drafting and are just like, oh, what are you doing? Anyway,
it works for them.
That's it for LPL Corner this week. And that's actually it for LPL Corner, not forever, but until off season. Because we'll be doing all of our Worlds content throughout Worlds. I will see you guys in a bit.